It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. Today, my guest is Sébastien St. Louis, CEO and co-founder of Hexo, a leading Canadian-based company in the recreational cannabis sector. Author of the billion-dollar startup, Sébastien co-founded Hexa with one goal in mind: to create a world-class company based on the highest standards of product quality and safety. Since 2013, he has secured more than $650 million in financing, and his leadership has been instrumental in navigating the company through regulatory, financing, and startup challenges, en route to becoming the only significant licensed cannabis producer in Quebec and one of the largest in Canada. Sébastien holds an MBA in finance from the University of Quebec en Montreal and completed his Bachelor of Arts in Economics from the University of Ottawa in 18 months. Sébastien St. Louis, welcome into the corner office.
Thank you, Brent. Thanks for having me.
Oh, great to have you here. And we spoke a couple of weeks ago. I'm at the kind of the opposite end of North America, out on the West Coast in California. It's nice and sunny here today. I won't ask you what it's like up there, but I think you're through the worst of the storm. Has the spring been coming already?
Well, we still have a couple feet of snow, Brent.
Oh, goodness. All right. Well, we won't go deeper into that. But more importantly, how are you doing? These have been interesting pandemic times, and we've certainly had, a couple of blows through this section of our life, as has been evident with a lot of the healthcare issues. What's it like in your community? More importantly, how's your family and how's your company done through this period?
I've been incredibly fortunate during the pandemic. We are designated as essential workers, being producers of cannabis. Right. So we still go to work as the first thing. The second thing is that we have very stringent quality and security processes and safety processes, and we've doubled down on those processes during the pandemic. So it's full PPE, face masks, and so there's still some possible interaction.
Office workers,
absolutely
sites,
everybody.
Everything.
Absolutely everybody. Yeah, our office workers are working from home. The production sites in greenhouse and at the manufacturing plant are there, but in full head to toe PPE. I make it out to the production sites at a minimum of once a month at each different site, and so that kind of changes the air and allows you to get away. And
literally and figuratively.
And my kids aren't in school yet, so two young kids and very fortunate. They're healthy and happy. So life is as good as it can be.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Well, let's start with your early years. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what your early family life was like.
Well, I grew in a small community called Blackburn Hamlet, which is in the east end of Ottawa. Right. I grew up, both my parents were teachers, and grew up had a very nice childhood. Was good friends, good schools.
Bilingual home, mom and dad. French,
Francophone. Francophone. So my father actually fought for French language rights in Ontario back many years ago. So there was a question of whether French schools would be put into legislation in Ontario in the 70s, and my father led that battle and secured French language schools in Ontario from his home. They were from Northern Ontario.
Was he in education, or what was his occupational background?
He started with the federal government and finished his career in education. And he was a poet in his spare time and a photographer.
Awesome. And mom, did she work from the home or also have a career?
Mom's been a teacher her whole life. When she started at 19 years old and had a wonderful career, phenomenal pedagogue, and very well regarded. She still meets every once in a while some old students, so she made a mark.
That's very satisfying, I'm sure. Brothers and sisters?
I'm an only child.
Only child. Got it. So if you think about some of the times growing up, and I'm sure education was a big part of it, but what were some of the early memories that you had about, kind of mom and dad's, approach to parenting and work?
Well, I have to thank my father for putting a lot of emphasis on critical thinking for myself. We grew up. I grew up playing chess with my father from time to time, and was always encouraged to pursue anything that interested me. So I had a lot of latitude and support there.
Awesome. Other people that were influences, any coaches or teachers that you remember, or that perhaps you go back to as people go back to your mom from those early days?
Well, not from the early days in terms of going back, but I've had some pretty wonderful teachers, coaches, mentors along the way. Most recently, of course, I've been privileged. One of the most wonderful things about being CEO of a company that's growing like Hexo is that I have a phenomenal board of directors. And this board of directors have really become friends, mentors, on top of being business partners. And so people like Dr. Michael Munzar, our chairman, Vince Chiara, another one of our board members that has been instrumental in helping build Hexo, have really helped me to grow, I think, as an executive, and I continue to turn to their counsel on a daily basis.
Are there some generational differences there? Are they like 10, 15 years older or about the same age, or?
Well, I'm still fairly young, I guess, in the role. So I'm 37 years old. So I wouldn't say the general difference matters, but yes, my board of directors are in their 50s and 60s.
Have the experience. Yeah, that's
awesome.
Right. Were you a good student in school?
I was a fairly good student in school, and I never put in I probably didn't put in enough effort on the front end, but usually got the pretty good marks. And I would only rediscover really proper studying and school during my MBA, which I enjoyed.
What about other outside activities? You were involved in sports, music, debate. Were there other things that you enjoyed growing up?
I grew up. I was a fairly active athlete. I played football, American football, for years, and then after that, got into to powerlifting and was a kickboxer for many years. That's something I still take up today.
Yeah. Did you compete as a kickboxer?
I've never competed. No, I was in the best shape of my life a few years ago, right before I started Hexo, actually, and then then it got really difficult.
We won't go down that rabbit hole.
and was about to compete, and then the company started, and other priorities took over.
Well, you obviously are an entrepreneur, and we'll get into the Hexo story in a few minutes. But what about early on? Were there things that you did as an entrepreneur as a kid growing up? The ubiquitous paper route or other things that you might have been involved with as a kid?
Well, it wasn't so much a paper route. So I got into 3D simulation when I was about 15 years old. Wow. And at 16, got disinterested in high school quite a bit. And I was very lucky. I had a partner of one of my teachers, a guy called Paul Amaro, who worked at the National Research Council, saw my interest in 3D and brought me over. So I started doing some contracts for the National Research Council. That
at 15.
I was just when I started, I was late in my teens, and then turned 16. I started my own company called 3D1, and at that time, I was one of 3 guys in the country that could do the sort of work that was required, and that led to doing work for the Canadian Space Agency. And so we were doing some simulations on satellite shakers, and we did some work for the David Florida Laboratory, and it was a really wonderful experience.
Wow. So kind of more of a design capabilities then? Is that what you were involved with? Or
yeah, it was design, 3D modeling, and simulation was the business. And so, of course, cool. I took it. I was quite proud and happy, and I thought I was doing very well. Unfortunately, I didn't have the experience at the time to build a team around me. And that's something that would stick with me years later when I started at Hexo, because that's the very first thing I did.
Right. And you got paid for it too, on top of that.
Well, huh? Yeah, and possibly too much for a 16-year-old.
And you went on to college, and obviously that's your MBA with the University of Ottawa, and you studied economics. Did you kind of have a feeling then that you would go into business? Is that why you chose that field?
I think I've always, I chose my very first field was actually a Bachelor of Arts, and I chose it because it was the shortest degree. I wanted the piece of paper. I really was not interested in the schooling. And so I found a 3-year degree at the University of Ottawa, which is a Bachelor of Arts. And I did it in both languages, in English and French concurrently. And that allowed me to complete it in 17 months.
That's cool.
So I got through that very quickly, and it was very opportunistic. Later on, when I would come back to my MBA and most of my master's in quantitative finance, that one I never finished. Again, company got in the way. But those I would take my time. So I did my bachelor's degree in 17 months. It took me 10 years to get my MBA.
And you were doing 3D1 at the same time as you got your bachelor's, right?
Well, 3D1 was just on the tail end. So I finished that and then left 3D1 to do my bachelor's, realizing that 3D1 was not scaling. I needed more experience. And another thing I credit my parents with, and my father especially, really pushing me hard to go back to school, get a formal education. And of course, that would lead to my re-entrepreneurship career, if you will, working in the banks at Export Development Canada and Trade Finance, and then at Business Development Bank in commercial lending.
Was Export Development, was that kind of the first professional job that you took on, or was there other things that you did in working in a large organization?
EDC was the first real job, if you want to call it that, right?
Yeah. Did you get leadership responsibilities early on, Sébastien?
I built in. So the job, it was not a leadership role right away, but I rapidly grew into it. So I joined a team of 6 people when I was at EDC, first doing, basically EDC had all their varied products. And then they had a division called small business, which was for companies 5 million in revenue and under. So that's where I joined. And I rapidly realized that EDC had a slew of products available for larger companies, but none of those products were available for smaller companies. It was basically just accounts receivable insurance. What I did is I productized all the senior level products that were very complicated, and I productized them for small business. And we grew that small team from 6 people to well over 30 in about a year and a half. And we grew the book of business from something like $40 million to $300 million over 24 months. So that led to then some more leadership, although informal at the time, until I got poached by BDC.
So the EDC is that the export is it a government organization? Is it quasi-public? Tell us a little bit about how they're structured.
Yeah, so EDC is a wonderful organization. Actually, it's a crown corporation owned by the federal government of Canada, and its mandate is to increase Canadian exports and international trade.
Yeah. So what attracted you to go there early on?
I got attracted there because it was based on business growth. It was I looked at it as a learning ground. It was entrepreneurial in the sense that it was run for profit, so it had the stability of government with an entrepreneurial flair. So that was interesting, and most importantly, I got to work with entrepreneurs. So although my work itself wasn't the entrepreneurial, every day I got to interface with presidents and CEOs of small companies, and that was a wonderful experience.
Yeah, awesome. And you moved into people management in that job, right? Were you managing people at the end of the time of you departing there?
No, not officially. At EDC and BDC, I never actually directly managed folks, although informal team lead at EDC with about 17 people. Yeah.
Right. And then the Business Development Bank of Canada, is that BBC? Is that what you refer to?
That's right. That's
right. Okay. So is that also kind of a quasi-government organization? Tell us a little bit about that.
Correct. So for-profit organization owned by the federal government, and that one with a mandate to bridge the financing gap for small businesses while they grow before they're strong enough to stand on their own and go to a normal commercial credit, but after they're strong enough. So not angel capital, not commercial credit, but in between.
Right. So what was the attraction to do that? Just get a little heavier into the finance area and learn about that? Or did you kind of have an affinity for numbers and, what it took to be successful, obviously for entrepreneurs to also be successful with numbers, right? I mean, that's a very important part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So getting into BDC was a great opportunity to work with larger companies. So my mandate there was I didn't deal with companies 5 million in revenue and under. It was 5 million and over. And in that capacity, so then I interact with companies that could do 150 million in revenue, again directly with presidents and CEOs. And we had a whole consulting arm on which I helped there. So to go in and do consulting on the businesses, so similar as you would do on MBA business cases, but on real world examples. So there I worked in the manufacturing sector with over the years with over 300 different CEOs and presidents, learning their business, hopefully improving their business, and providing credit.
And then I believe you moved into a CFO position with a company. Was that one of the ones that you advised with or consulted with?
Well, that's one of the ones that I guess I impressed more than others. And the CEO of that company, Trevor Kingsbury at Wholesale Auto Parts Warehouses, saw what I was doing. He said one day, Sébastien, I need to grow the business, and in fact, I want to sell it. So why don't you come work with me? Right. And I said, okay, well, that's interesting. So I said, absolutely, let's go take a look at this. And so I went in, and over the following 12 months, we grew the business from 5 to 10 million in revenue. Wow. And we put in a whole bunch,
not years.
Yeah, 12 months. So we doubled the business. Impressive. And the president of the company was a typical entrepreneur, working 100-hour weeks, doing too much himself. And so I refocused him on the things he was phenomenal at, which was R&D, IP development, and sales. And I took everything else away from his plate. And in that sense, we were able to put in a whole bunch of process, having learned the original lessons of my life. And on building team, we built up the team, took all that off his plate, and then we just watched him do his magic and blow up the sales. And what was really interesting, and the thing that there was a bad outcome for me personally, and really overall a great outcome for me personally at the back of that journey. So when we finished, we had brought his hours down from 100 hours a week to 20 hours. We had doubled the revenue of his business, and he was happier than ever. So a year later, after my mandate, remember this was to go in and sell the company. He said, well, I don't want to sell. I go, well, that's problematic because that's how I get paid.
That's right. Yeah.
So, right. But it wasn't a big deal. We're still great friends. And we actually go snowmobiling every once in a while together and talk about the good old times. His business is even more successful now that I'm gone. And he's turned into a bit of a mentor on the sales side. So the good part of that has been seeing the growth and the ability of an entrepreneur to focus on what they're good at and build a team around them.
Yeah. Awesome. Now, was it in that role that you first started managing people directly?
Oh, officially, yeah, I guess. Officially, yes.
And what were some of the challenges you had during that? I mean, you worked very closely, obviously, with a lot of these CEOs and presidents, and you had team people around you. But, when you kind of move into that management role, did you find some issues that you encountered at that time?
Well, one of the larger issues in that particular role was just, I was coming into a team that they had all been doing their jobs for 15 years or more. They had a tremendous amount of experience, but there was also a lot of ingrained how to do things. So changing that without upsetting people, that was certainly a major challenge.
But you were successful and were able to get them on track. And then did you find your replacement before you moved on, or how did you kind of transition out of that business after a year plus?
Well, no. So what I did is I believe when you're at the kind of the C level of your goal should be to build an organization that goes on without you. You can get hit by a bus the next day. If you've put in the right process and the right team around you, unless you need to keep building that business, then you should essentially be superfluous. Right. So no, when I left, that simply meant the company got a little bit more profitable, and then it just kept doing its thing.
Yeah, awesome. So Hexo is next. Tell us a little bit about the origins of getting that started. We're back in about 2012, 2013?
Yeah, now we're in 2013. It was July and actually Canada Day, and I was sitting around a campfire with a good friend of mine. And I've this good friend of mine who now works for me. He's our director of compliance and regulatory, Max Sear. Max was working for Health Canada. And he tells me around that campfire that day, Sébastien, they're about to legalize medical marijuana. And for the last couple of years, there was a bit of a gap there, Brian, we didn't touch. But I had been off of wholesale auto parts for a few years, just investing in real estate, doing cash flow real estate investing. I didn't need to go back to work because I had been successful enough previous to that. When I say worked, a traditional job, and I was looking for my next business. So I took years to do so, for which I do give a lot of thanks to my wife. She was phenomenally patient. Aruna was great with me and supportive during those years, giving me all the time I needed to find the right idea. And sitting with Max around that campfire that day, I knew right away that was the right idea.
The light bulb went off.
Yeah, absolutely. I said, here was a business where we would have a government erected moat around the business for competitive purposes, right? We'd have this license that would basically protect our business while we built it. I knew the marijuana business from my youth, and although I was quite late before the first time I tried the product, I think I was about 24, but growing up in my teens, all my friends consumed marijuana all the time. So I knew the demand was huge, and it was a huge, and it was a cash business.
Was it a criminal offense there? I mean, were the laws different in Canada than down in the States during the time you were growing up? Or
until legalization in that would come in late 2013, it was absolutely illegal. There was a carve out under a medical program for a grow at home, but it was very cumbersome. You had to go get your license. There was about 5,000 Canadians at the time that had those personal grow licenses for personal use. That would later feed into gray market for years to come, and the government would try to roll that back. But that was a big part of creating a national framework for legalization with licensed producers, was to be able to mature that out of the gray market into what we have now in Canada today, which is a fully blown legal system with both adult use and medical that grows, consumes, and also exports.
Who was behind the original kind of impetus of legalizing medical marijuana? Was it a government agency? Did it come more from public protesting, or the folks that obviously have pain management issues? What was kind of or was it a combination of everything really that kind of came together back in 2013?
Well, I think it was a confluence of a lot of things, but I think the key, if you're going to point to one thing, the Supreme Court of Canada made a ruling specifically. So we talked about those personal grow licenses on the medical side pre what was the MMPR, which was the piece of legislation that would come into place and be replaced eventually by the Cannabis Act, under which we operate today. But ahead of that MMPR program was this MMAR program, the Medical Marijuana Access Regulations. And that program basically allowed you to grow at home if you had a prescription from your doctor for your own use. And there was a Supreme Court challenge around the accessibility of marijuana because it did so much good for people, and people were being forced to take other prescription medicines that didn't help their health.
And probably were more addictive as well.
Absolutely. It was more addictive, more dangerous. It was more expensive. And so that got challenged at the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court essentially ordered the federal government to come up with a solution to increase access to medical marijuana. And the conservative government of Canada at the time came up with what would be the MMPR, so the precursor to the Cannabis Act.
Yeah, fantastic. So you had this conversation around the campfire, and what came next?
Well, I didn't sleep for 48 hours, and so I didn't have a laptop with me.
Right?
I got the financial projections right away, and I was doing them. So imagine Excel on paper on a kitchen table in an old cottage. Cottage is probably too generous; it's more of a camp. And the next day, my wife joins me, and I hadn't slept all night, and I just run out of the porch, and I say, "We're gonna grow weed," and with a big smile on my face. She looked at me.
She looked at you.
Are you crazy, or are you on the drugs you want to grow? No. And so but you know what? Then I explained the business plan, and she thought it was a great idea and always supportive. And that was the early journey. So
now, did you go out and seek venture capital? Did you use your own capital? I know you have a co-founder or two.
Well, the very first step, So we're two founders, myself and Adam Mirren, and Adam would come into the picture 2 weeks later. So Adam is my brother-in-law. So he married Mina, who is Aruna's sister. Aruna is my wife. And that's how Adam and I know each other. And Adam was a successful entrepreneur. He founded iPolitics, which was the largest online newspaper in Canada for many years. So he had a lot of great baggage behind him, sales and marketing expertise. So coming at this, actually, my first concern wasn't capital. My first concern was building the team. And so the very first thing I said, okay, I'm pretty good on finance and operations, but I needed a really good marketer. I also needed to round out the people skills. Adam's a phenomenal people person. And so I went to him and shared the idea and said, I have an idea. I'd like you to go in business with me.
Did he look at you cross-eyed first?
You know what, that morning we were actually at a party, at a friend's party. We had two friends getting married. We were out on in downtown Ottawa in a high-rise on a patio, and I turned over and told him the idea. And yeah, at first he kind of shook his head and it was a straight no, but then he
literally, he was thinking, what have you been smoking?
Yeah, something like that. And but then the more I kept, I've never stopped talking when people say no. And then I just
the more strategy.
The more I talked, the more interested he was. And I recall at the time I told Adam, I think this could be like a $20 million family business. Wow. Which is funny because a few years later, here we are at $1 billion market cap, right? And in fact, so it was Adam's idea recently to write a book. So we wrote a book about the journey called Billion Dollar Startup. Yeah, that's right. And we just published in January. It's a national bestseller here in Canada. Okay. And you can read all about that meeting and many more actually between the pages.
I love it. And Julie Bune, is that how you pronounce her last name? Is that...
That's right. So Julie got to witness it firsthand, which was pretty cool. And she's a phenomenal writer, very easy reading style. I'm thrilled that I mean, first of all, I never would have had the time or capacity to write it. So she did a way better job than I ever could have. And she saw it firsthand. She was our publicist at Hexo for about 3 years in the early years. And so she really got to, it was kind of like embedded journalism, right? And so she then had the Adam approach her to write the book, and she thought it was a phenomenal idea, and here we are.
Awesome. Can't wait to read it. I've already ordered it since our last call, so I'll look forward to a follow-up on this. But let's just rewind a little bit. Tell us about those early days. So you have this idea, you've got your brother-in-law involved, you've obviously got a lot of excitement around it. Was it your own money? Again, did you seek outside capital? How did you kind of get things started in those early days?
Yeah,
particularly given that it wasn't yet quite legal. Right?
No, I mean, so not legal at the time. Not legal at the time. Right. Presumed to become medically legal only. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
No, and excitement at the time, I would say actually that's probably the wrong characterization. We were excited. Nobody else was.
People look at you like, yeah, right.
Brant, I couldn't get a meeting with anyone. Anyone said we're marijuana, no, not interested. And so at the time, Adam had the great idea. He's like, listen, we gotta make sure, we gotta at least be able to get these meetings. So we came. The first name we had was terrible. The second was better, but not much better. And then we finally landed on what I think is a great name, which is Hexo. But the first name was Canadian Medical Services, because everyone was so afraid of marijuana that we had to come up with the blandest, most innocuous thing we could come up with. Right. And so we started the business under Canadian Medical Services. And then the first thing, of course, was capital. So at the time, I mean, we had a little bit of capital on our own, but certainly not a lot. So but it was all started on my line of credit. I maxed out a $35,000 line of credit. That was the seed capital, and everything was run off my personal Visa card. Although comfortable, we certainly were not wealthy, right? We were middle class and well off. So it was a stretch for us. Now, obviously, we knew that the business plan would not survive on $35,000, and this is where I decided to go out and with Adam, and we basically leaned on every single person that was close to us to help put the first round of seed capital together.
Anything you can give, guys.
we were both. We were both of relatively modest means, and we certainly didn't know any wealthy people. So when you think of angel investors, when you're a person here or there that had small hundreds of thousands of dollars, but nobody that were multimillionaires. Right. So we literally raised our first $1 million, and we would raise $1.1 million. It was the first round of financing, closed December 2013. So about 5 months after we started the business. That was
and so we went $5,000, $10,000, $25,000 investors, I imagine, something like that.
It was a whole bunch of $10,000 checks.
A bunch of $10,000.
Yeah, our smallest check we took was $5,000. There was one friend that said, "Hey, I really want to come in, but I don't have $10,000." We said, "Listen, we'll take what you got." So he gave us $5,000. That was the smallest. And although we did throughout that journey, those first couple of months, that's where I would come to meet who would become our chairman, Dr. Michael Meinzar. Right. And so I met Michael.
And he'd been in the field, correct? Or what was his background?
So he was from a pharma background. So he became a GP later because I think he got fed up with all the politics around pharma.
Right.
But he was actually involved at Nymox Pharmaceuticals and Asta Biotechnology as well, in which he had some interesting lessons there. So he coming out and knew the product as well, knew it had helped patients tremendously. And so, we first got introduced through one of our growers. So Adam and I it was Adam that found this guy who was a grower that had a lot of experience. And he said, hey, you guys should talk to this doctor from Montreal. So a couple of weeks later, Michael and his business partner drive out. I was on my own at the time. Adam was on a trip. And I meet them. And of course, I live in this really terrible 2-bedroom townhouse downtown, right? Like my wife and I were frugal. We bought the cheapest house in Centertown we could find. We wanted to be central. So I can't meet him here, right? That's not gonna work. So what I would do, and we laugh about it today. So we rented a room in there was a small local coffee roastery, and we rented a room there. We thought that'd be pretty cool. And to this day, Michael laughs at me. He said, "Yeah, I came in that he didn't have 2 pennies to scratch together. I think I had to buy the coffee."
I love it. And today, how many employees and publicly traded?
So from those early days, and Michael would eventually, he was our first independent investor. So the first $1.1 million, he put about $250,000 in. Today, we're sitting at about 750 employees, market cap of $1 billion. There are over 500,000 individual shareholders, if you can believe it. So publicly listed on the New York Stock Exchange and also the Toronto Stock Exchange.
Yeah. And full disclosure, I am one since our last call. So
wonderful. Well, we're only talking about public stuff, so don't worry. You can still trade.
Good. And wow, interesting. And how many total employees now?
750.
Right. And your operations are across Canada and also into the U.S., right? You've got a relationship in Colorado, as I understand it.
That's right. Yeah. So we during our journey, about 5 years in from the start, so I guess it would have been about 2018, we did a deal with Molson Coors to do cannabis-based beverages, and that deal resulted in the formation of a joint venture called Truss. Joint venture, which Hexo owns 42.5% of. And that joint venture had its own CEO who stood up as its own beverage company that would focus on cannabis beverage. That company has recently launched as part of Trust USA. We've just launched our Veryvel brand, which is a CBD sparkling water line in Colorado. And it's going, they launched in January. It's going very well. We're on the end caps of major grocery stores in Colorado. So people are talking about it. And I'm looking forward to seeing the actual sales numbers over the following quarters.
Tell us a little bit about the transition from the medical only to the recreational. Now, when did that take place in Canada, and how did that impact your business?
So that was a huge sea change. So when I came in, when we first started, you have to understand the licensing process was nothing easy. So, we raised that first $1 million, and that got us to the next round, which would be about 3.5. But at that time, it was very, very difficult to raise capital. And we didn't have a full-blown license. So what we ended up having to do, we had applied for our own license, but that license would eventually fail. That license application, the city didn't like the zoning, and they had a change of heart. So what we had to do is we had to pivot. And at the time, Adam and I found another licensee that was in Gatineau, where we are today in Masson, and we would meet who would become the third partner, a farmer called Louis Gagnon. And Louis was a master horticulturalist. He had a phenomenal flower business, and he had applied for these MMPR licenses, and he had actually secured a phase 1 cultivation license. So Hexo would buy that farm, would come to buy that farm, own that phase 1 license. But then we had to graduate it into a full-blown license. So to understand why that's important, the phase 1 license was the right to own the plants, but you couldn't do anything with them. You had to basically prove to the government that you could hold these plants, not have them stolen or lost, and basically graduate to something that allowed you to sell those licenses.
Wow.
So that was about a 2-year process. And during that time, during that time, it was very, very difficult. I mean, we were near bankruptcy quite a few times. We had to kind of go back and retap lines of credit, put back personal capital at risk, all without taking salaries, I might say. Like my first couple of years at Hexo was salary free, and then I think I pulled maybe a total of $100,000 in the first 4 years. So all that a huge challenge, but then from and also putting us behind our competitors. So I'm going to get to your I know it's a long-winded answer. Getting back to that question, a recreational medical switch, why was it important? Is that all that challenge, we were the 17th licensed producer in Canada at the time. We were 2 years behind some of our main competitors, household names that you would know of today, that they're publicly listed, and now they compete against us, right? Today, Hex was a top 3 cannabis company in Canada, by the way. We have top 3 market share. What happened is that the legalization of adult use gave Hexo a window to completely refocus its strategy. And so
when was that? What was this, like 15, 16 or?
I believe it was 15 when they announced and went live, and when it would go live a few years later, about 2 years later. So when that came out, it really gave us an opportunity to refocus. We were struggling to gather patients. We were, we had a fairly small team at the time, maybe 60 people, and then this story came out. And we said, okay, well, we got to go after the adult use market. I mean, medical is already crowded. There's already moats around clinic relationships and this sort of thing that we were penetrating, but it was taking a lot of time. So we decided to put all our efforts into expanded capability and to supplying what would be the government of Quebec's play SQDC. SQDC, the retailer owned by the government of Quebec. And that would give us a platform to become a national player.
Got it. Cool. And then literally just took off after that. And when did you go public? What was the year that you went to the markets?
We first went public, I believe that was in 2015 on the Toronto Venture Exchange, so the junior exchange. And we would uplist a few years later, and a few years after that, we would list on the New York Stock Exchange.
So the first time you went out, were you still just in medical only, or was recreational already in place?
It was medical only.
Medical only. Okay, so that came later. Fantastic. Well, tremendous ride. And everyone out there, read the book, $1 Billion Startup. Get a chance to get that. I'm sure we can find it on Amazon or anywhere else. But just kind of back to you and your evolution. Tell me a little bit about how your leadership style evolved over time. I mean, you obviously worked very closely with a lot of president CEOs. You worked in these quasi-government organizations. You obviously helped a lot of folks who were successful. You did the wholesale auto parts business. I mean, you really were not in consumer products at all. Right? I mean, you might have had a couple of clients and so forth. And, it's a very different business, first of the medical side and then recreational. And how did that kind of play out in terms of as you grew into the role of CEO? And what did you find, kind of some of the things that you needed to change from a leadership standpoint?
Well, you definitely have to become, there's a huge shift in any business when you go from entrepreneurial to large business.
Right.
And moving from the hands-on do everything to process-driven team of experts, professionals running the show. And so from that sense, I'm phenomenally lucky or blessed. We've built a world-class team at Hexo. And so moving into CPG, I'm surrounded by CPG executives. So when I look at
brought a lot of good people in.
Absolutely. That's key. And at the core of it is also, I believe in bringing in good people and then giving them a lot of leash. My job is really to focus the story, say no to what are we not going to do. So for example, when we went adult use, we said we're going to freeze our medical business and we're going to solely focus on growing the adult use or the recreational business.
Oh, really? So you literally got out of the medical side?
Well, we still have medical patients today because we never wanted to get out. We didn't think that was right because these people need their medicine, right? And it changes their lives. So we have about 10,000 patients today at Hexo. So still a fair amount. And we do, funnily enough, now we've entered the medical business in places like Israel through export. But the core of the business is really about being a adult use business here in Canada and the US. So really the leadership style is really one of once you set your strategy, you then have to set a structure that's lean and cohesive with that. And then you have to fill it with people that have seen the movie before. And then you have to hold them accountable. You have to hold them accountable to very high standards and to deliver on that mission, and then help them when they fail. And if the business outgrows them, unfortunately, right, you have to make those choices as well. But overall, I've been very blessed.
Yeah, awesome. You mentioned you went through a couple of different names. Tell us how you came to Hexo. What does that mean? Does it have anything behind it? And kind of how that became, the marker, so to speak, for your CPG business.
So the company officially launched under the name Hydropothecary. Hydropothecary was the original name of the company, which was a cross between hydroponics and apothecary. So trying to harken back to the old school customer service, in-person shopping, and the technology of hydroponics, indoor grow. So problematic for a couple of reasons. One, it was an absolute mouthful. Couldn't spell it to save our lives. And in retrospect, certainly a mistake. But as we grew and we made that shift from medical to adult use, the apothecary piece didn't make much sense anymore. Right. We chose a low-cost greenhouse cultivation to start. And although we used hydroponics, it certainly wasn't hydroponics focused. And I don't think people put two and two together in either case. So we needed something simple, catchy. We wanted something that would line up against the ticker. We wanted to preserve a little bit of the history with the H from hydropothecary. Yeah. And all those things would culminate into us finding there was a French language play called Hexo, which was without the H, that was a play on really good weed, essentially. Right. So that kind of fit. There was a 2-syllable. We could get the ticker, we could get the website. It had the nice play, that history, and so Hexo was born, and that was Adam's brainchild.
There you go. Company culture is a big part of recruiting and obviously bringing people in. We spoke about that a couple of weeks ago when we first talked. And when you create a new company, you really do start from a single piece of clay. How would you describe Hexo's company culture, and what do you personally do to keep that alive?
So there's 4 core values at Hexo: execution, collaboration, innovation, and integrity. And I would say that the most important of all of those values, and the one that has really defined Hexo, has been execution. Hexo has very much an approach of, if you face a brick wall, you find a way around it, over it, dig under it, or blast through it. And that is a theme that has come back over and over and over again. In fact, as we've matured as an organization, that's actually part of the culture that we've had to hone back and really balance with our other values, such as collaboration. Because one of the downfalls of always wanting to run through brick walls is sometimes you can have a tendency of running through your teammates, which is counterproductive. That doesn't work. And that really came from my days at captain of the offensive line when I was playing football. The great thing about football, you got one of the 13 people on that line that don't do what they're supposed to do, and the play doesn't work. You need every single person to do their job, and business isn't any different.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Well, we've just about ran out of time, but I do have a couple last questions I want to go over with you, Sébastien. And talking about hiring people, and you obviously are growing. I'm sure there's been a little bit of COVIDian, furloughs and so forth, but hopefully as we're coming out of that, what do you look for when you're making bets on the people you invest in and hire at Hexa?
So the fit and culture is always one. I mean, there's a couple of must-haves, right? So the technical expertise and experience, seen the movie before, those are must-haves, and that's actually the easier thing to find. I think the most important thing when you're assessing an individual to join the team is really that quality, that winner's attitude, the want and the need to win.
Get through that wall.
Get through that wall. And,
over it, under it, around it, whatever it takes.
Or through
it.
And having done it, right? Having done it many times. So assessing that quality, which is a very hard thing to do, and compared, of course, with all the technical expertise, and then being able to focus that person into their swim lane. So having them really be able to go deep rather than wide, and then having us all come up for air once a week as a cohesive team to all improve together.
Lastly, Sébastien, we have got a lot of younger listeners to the show, and particularly people that are, maybe in their 20s and 30s, taking a look at their career. What kind of career and life advice would you give to someone who has their eyes on their own corner office, or, for example, like you, wants to be an entrepreneur and be successful?
The only advice I would give is advice I've received a very long time ago, and I might modulate it a little bit. And it's advice I got from my father when I was fed up from school and I didn't want to go back. So my advice to all young people is whether you like it or not. I hated school in the early years. I absolutely despised it. But you know what? And I would end, and I would love it. Go do a formal education. Go get your piece of paper, because if you don't have a piece of paper, it's going to be very difficult starting from nothing to impress and get the base experience that you need. So, and it's a great fallback plan. Once you have a fallback plan, the next and perhaps the more important piece of advice: don't let anybody tell you no. Because they all will. They'll all tell you your ideas.
As crazy as they
bad.
may look at you with your ideas, right?
They'll tell you it's impossible. They'll tell you it's a bad idea. They'll talk behind your back, and it does not matter. You must continue. The most important thing in the success of a business is unrelenting willpower.
Well, Sébastien St. Louis, founder and CEO of Hexo, thank you so much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
Thanks for having me, Brent.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.